In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. All praise belongs to God, the Lord of all worlds. May peace and blessings be upon the greatest of all prophets and messengers, Muhammad, and upon his family and companions. The poems of Sheikh Sharaf al-Din Umar Ibn al-Farid are known for their beautiful words and deep meanings about loving and getting closer to God. Scholars have studied them for a long time, trying to understand their hidden messages. Ibn al-Farid's grandson, Ali, gathered his poems into a book called a Diwan. Important scholars like Sheikh Hassan al-Burini and Sheikh Abdul Ghani al-Nabulsi wrote explanations of the Diwan to help people understand it. May God bless them both. Rashid ibn Ghalib al-Lubnani put these two explanations together in one book, which is the one you have now. He explained that he used all of al-Burini's explanation and added short comments from al-Nabulsi after each verse, marking them with N and A. He also included the introduction to the Diwan and Sheikh Ali's comments on two poems called the Ayniya and Mimiya, taking those from al-Nabulsi's work. Let's learn a bit about Ibn al-Farid, the two scholars who explained his work and the person who put it all together. Ibn al-Farid was born in 1181 and died in 1235. His full name was Umar ibn Ali ibn Mushid ibn Ali. He was from Hama, but he was born, raised and died in Egypt. He's known as Abu Hafs and Abu al-Qasim Sharaf al-Din ibn al-Farid, the greatest Sufi poet. He's called the Sultan of Lovers. His poetry explores the idea of the oneness of being. His father moved from Hama in Syria to Egypt and worked in law, eventually becoming a judge. This is why he was called al-Farid, which means the unique one. Ibn al-Farid grew up in a family that valued knowledge and faith. He studied law, learned about the Prophet's teachings, and studied with important scholars. Later he became a Sufi, living a simple life and spending time in quiet mosques and graveyards. He traveled to Mecca, prayed there, and spent time alone in a valley. He wrote most of his poems during this time. After 15 years, he went back to Egypt and became a preacher at Al-Azhar Mosque. He became very famous, and even the king visited him. He was known for being handsome, kind, and a good speaker. He enjoyed watching the Nile River and the sea. He loved beauty. A scholar named al-Munawi tells a story about Ibn al-Farid enjoying music and dancing in a spiritual way, showing that everyone expresses their love for God differently. Al-Burini was born in 1556 and died in 1615. His full name is Hassan ibn Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Safuri al-Burini, also known as Badr al-Din. He was a historian and scholar of literature, the Prophet's teachings, law, math, and logic. He was born in Safuriya in Jordan and moved to Damascus when he was young, where he lived and died. He knew Persian and Turkish. He wrote many books, including biographies of important people, an explanation of Ibn al-Farid's Diwan, stories about his travels, and books about religion and poetry. He was a great speaker and poet. Al-Nabulsi lived from 1641 to 1731. His full name is Abdul Ghani ibn Ismail ibn Abdul Ghani al-Nabulsi. He was a poet, religious scholar, writer and Sufi. He was born and raised in Damascus, traveled to Baghdad, and then traveled all over the Middle East before settling back in Damascus, where he died. He wrote many books about his travels, dream interpretation, the Prophet's teachings, and Sufi ideas. Rashid ibn Ghalib lived from 1813 to 1889. His full name is Rashid ibn Ghalib ibn Salum al-Dada al-Lubnani. He was a writer, linguist, poet and historian. He was born in Aramun, Kesrouan, Lebanon. He worked for Prince Bashir al-Shihabi. He later traveled to Marseille and died in France. He wrote many books on language, history and poetry. In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful, praise be to God, who guided Ibn al-Farid to write such beautiful poetry and explain its deep meanings. Peace and blessings be upon our Prophet Muhammad, his family, his companions, and all those who follow him until the day of judgment. Rashid ibn Ghalib says, Ibn al-Farid's poems are like a fresh spring of knowledge. I wanted to publish them with an explanation so everyone could understand their beauty. Sheikh Hassan al-Burini's explanation was excellent, covering language, poetry and other topics, but it didn't talk about Sufism. Sheikh Abdul Ghani al-Nabulsi's explanation focused on the Sufi meaning. So I used al-Burini's explanation and added short notes from al-Nabulsi. I also included the introduction to the Diwan and Sheikh Ali's comments to make the book even more helpful. I worked hard to make this book accurate, and I hope it helps everyone learn from Ibn al-Farid's work. Everything I took from al-Nabulsi is marked with N and A except for the introduction. I ask for God's help in all things. Ibn al-Farid's grandson, Ali, tells us that his father came from Hama to Egypt. He worked with legal matters for women and was known as al-Farid. Ibn al-Farid was born in Egypt. I looked at copies of Ibn al-Farid's Diwan and saw mistakes. So with God's help I made this corrected version using a copy from his descendant Kamal al-Din Muhammad. I read it to him and he read it to me. He said he learned it from his father. One poem was missing, written in Mecca. People in Mecca taught it to children and recited it from the mosques. It wasn't in the Diwan because it was written in Mecca, and the Diwan was put together in Cairo. The poem starts with, "A lightning strike appeared from the side of the valley, or did it rise above the face of Layla, the veiled one?" I searched for this poem for 40 years but couldn't find it. Then, after writing this introduction, I finally found it. I added it to the end of this book. Kamal al-Din Muhammad said the copy I used was checked against one written by Ibn al-Farid himself. It was borrowed by someone who never returned it. I heard it was still with him and that he had become a Sufi leader. The copy holds many secrets. Ibn al-Farid was a handsome man with a reddish glow to his face. When he was in a spiritual state, his face shone even brighter. He was modest and dignified. People crowded around him wherever he went. But he didn't let anyone kiss his hand, only shake it. He dressed well and smelled nice. He was respected by everyone, even scholars and officials. He was generous but never accepted gifts. A man asked a great scholar to explain the poem Natm al-Suluk. The scholar asked how many volumes it would take. The man said 2. The scholar smiled and said he could explain each line in 2 volumes. Ibn al-Farid's son said the scholar would often go into deep states of reverence, unable to see or hear. He would stand, sit, or lie down, motionless for days without eating, drinking, or speaking. It was said about him, "You see lovers lying prostrate in their homes, and by God, if the lovers swore that they were like the youth of the cave, not knowing how long they stayed, prostrate from love or death, they would not break their oath." Then he would wake up and recite new verses of Natm al-Suluk that God had inspired him to write. I found the Ta'iyya poem in an old manuscript. It's an amazing poem, sometimes called the Breath of Paradise or the Sense of Paradise. Ibn al-Farid first called it the Breaths of Paradise, then the Rays of Paradise. After seeing the Prophet Muhammad in a dream, he called it Nathm al-Suluk. He didn't write this poem like other poets. It came to him as inspiration during deep spiritual experiences. He would be in a trance for days, then wake up and recite many verses before going back into his trance. Ibn al-Farid lived a life dedicated to God. He interacted with important people like Sultan al-Malik al-Kamil, traveled to holy places and guided other spiritual seekers. He had profound spiritual experiences, sometimes speaking like a prophet or seeing into people's souls. He had visions of heaven. He spent time in Mecca during Ramadan, praying and receiving revelations. He was connected to other Sufi leaders. He refused gifts from the Sultan, showing his humility. But the Sultan insisted he accept them as a sign of respect. Poem 1. I left my longing for you like a ghost, a faint image of its former glow. I left my passion, a shadow in your eyes, where desire fades into the night. Hidden from those who seek me, I am like the moon, veiled from sight. I left behind a silent cry, a yearning heart, a shadow against the sky. Pain has become a part of me, like my own skin. My voice, once clear, is now lost within. My words, once true, now speak of sorrow, for the weight of love darkens my tomorrow. Like the waning crescent moon, I am unseen. If not for my pain, I would not be known. My eyes search but cannot find, for all that remains is a shadow in my mind. Poem 5. Life has been stolen from me, lost in darkness, but in loving you I've left my mark. Like a snake's venom, love's painful sting, I tremble, lost in love's endless night. Poem 6. Among my family I am a stranger, a wanderer lost in love's exchange. I no longer have a home, for without you I am left to roam. Poem 7. When patience is needed, I become wild, my heart untamed like a restless child. Though far from you, I still ache, longing with an empty will. May God reward you for your efforts. Those who love God, even their graves are humble. I'm not worthy, and how can you find this explanation easy when you are not among these people? Whose virtues are perfect. It is enough for a person to be good if their faults are considered. Oh God, you who have the most beautiful names, you are our ancestor. You sent peace upon them, and they deserved it. Oh God, as you have made us part of his nation, let us live and die loving you, following his faith. Oh God, open the doors of your mercy to us and unite us in the belief of those who know you, the pure nature that can create beautiful